Understand why a car was coming so fast. It was almost like they anticipated the light changing and knew that it would change, and we both hit each other at about 60 miles an hour.
Today, we are taking a look at the story of Tricia Barker, a Texas student that died in a car accident and came back with incredible information about what happened after death. Tricia grew up in the more rural side of Texas, where she had a childhood that was deeply connected with nature. She remarks on how she and her friends used to take their horses and go horse riding out on the great prairie fields and have a ball of time just jumping in the river, plucking grass, and just being secluded in nature with her friends. She had a very typical childhood when it comes to every Texas child, but nonetheless, one dark streak in her otherwise perfect childhood would be the fact that her mother was mentally ill and lashed out against Tricia in both physical and psychological manners, which caused Tricia to retreat further and further into her own world and the outdoors. She would do quite a bit of reading and had a studious nature, as she saw her books and studies as a manner of escape from the abuse she faced in her life. As a result, Tricia would become an outstanding student with excellent grades. Her efforts would grant her over $20,000 worth of scholarships in her name. This would enable her to study at the University of Texas, one of the best universities in the state. But Tricia's studious nature and love for the outdoors would begin to fade with the university, as the campus was one that promoted partying and getting wasted on alcohol. Tricia would unfortunately fall into the trap where her grades would eventually begin to decline. From being a straight A student in her first semester to being something average. Her life on campus and hardcore partying would eventually have her develop a drinking issue, which was only exacerbated further when she went through a bad breakup in her senior year. Tricia realized during her final year of university that she had become a shell of the person she was. She became quite depressed and began having anxiety issues, which led her to having panic attacks. This would be the first instant for Tricia where she would reflect on her own mortality and think about spirituality. She was agnostic and did not think that there was a typical afterlife like many religious faiths talk about. She was one of the opinion that we simply pass on in some other forms, or that there is nothing after this world. While she did believe in her own assumptions, coming to terms with it was one thing she could do, as she found the idea of her not existing anymore daunting. Her therapist would suggest that she reconnect with her love for running as a way to escape her depression. In turn, she would try and prepare for the Austin 10K marathon and begin running 8 to 10 miles every day. But the day before the race, she would have this nightmare where she felt like something was coming to attack her. The next morning, she would skip her morning coffee and head for the marathon in her car. Little did she know, her entire perspective on life was about to change. As she drove down the road, she would approach a junction where the light was yellow. In an attempt to jump the signal before it turned red, she would hit the gas. But no sooner did she cross the line than a car would come from the opposite side and collide with her car, which was traveling at nearly 60 miles an hour. In the blink of an eye, Tricia would realize that something was wrong and that she could not move. A bystander who saw the accident would rush over and help her and wait with her till the ambulance arrived. The only words that escaped her mouth were, "God, help me." She was wheeled into the ER on a stretcher and was made to spend a staggering 17 hours in pain till a surgeon came and reassured her that she would be able to walk again. When she had to sign a waiver, she saw that it said that she had a 17% chance of dying during surgery. She still thought nothing of it, as she was more scared that she wouldn't be able to go to school or walk again. The last thing she would remember was the surgeon holding her hand as she went under. The next thing Tricia would see is her looking at her own body being operated on in the operating room. She would immediately understand that she was out of her body and a spirit looking at her physical form. Her excitement would be through the roof as she finally had the answer to her question, what lies beyond this world? Tricia would remark that this ethereal form of hers was free from all forms of tension and pain and would have a higher awareness of where she was. She would see large beings of light in the operating room, channeling their energy through the surgeons. She would converse with these beings and they would even show their power to Tricia. But then her body would begin to collapse and her heart would flatline due to internal bleeding. Tricia would wander out of the room in her ethereal form to see her relatives and the several people who were praying for her. She would immediately fly into the sky above the city and she would have a bird's eye view of everything. And the next thing she saw is the vast expanse of space and the numerous amounts of stars in the sky, just like how we see the Hubble telescope pictures. While she was in the stars, she got approached by this being of light that gave her some of the most fundamental messages that were relevant to the human experience. One of these lessons that the being of light gave is that love is all that we can take with us and connect with nature and be like a child. She was then shown some moments of her childhood and understood that she had to become more like her childlike self. She then saw the moments of her life where she should have been better. She had this belief that she was better than most people and looked down at those who didn't go to college. She remembered and saw the times that she did not acknowledge the people at the places where she worked part-time as a waitress because, unlike her, these people worked full-time in such positions. She realized how arrogant she had been when she saw this couple who she worked with go home and pray against her depression and for her to get better. She remembered all the time she judged them for the most superficial of things like what they wore and regretted it heavily. When this review of her life was over, she was immediately transported to this place full of greenery and she immediately understood that she was standing in heaven and felt the most calm she had ever felt in her life. For the first time, she felt absolutely unburdened, with no pain and no sorrows. And when she thought it couldn't get any better, her grandfather came out to meet her. She remarks on how this man, who died from leukemia, looking dazzling and handsome here, and was flowing with light. She was overjoyed to see him, as her granddad was the only person in her childhood with whom she had a real connection through her traumatic past. She and her granddad would then take a stroll through heaven in his pickup. He would then ask her something that would get her even more excited. He asked her, "Do you want to continue on?" And she instinctively looked up and saw that there was more to this spiritual experience and that the plane she was on was just the beginning. She flew up immediately and soared through the sky and felt the most relieved and happy she had ever been. She says that no experience on earth that she had or will have can compare to the amount of joy she felt at that moment. She would finally hit this energy wall, which was the last thing that separated her from God, but then he would tell her to look down. She would see this endless river with many people walking on or beside it. Some of them were enclosed with light, while others looked like shadow figures. She immediately understood that those who had the light around them were connected to God, while the others weren't and lived in fear even in such a place as heaven. Right before she got sent back to Earth, she would get one final instruction from God that would tell her that she was going to be a teacher, to which she protested in her mind because she wanted to make money and not some low-paying job. Her aspirations to become a lawyer were solely based on her writing skills and her interest in making money, and yet she had the maker of the universe telling her that she was going to be a teacher and teach more people to love and hate less. But before she could protest, God took her and shot her back into the planet and right back into her body. She would wake up and immediately begin rambling about the things she had seen. She would grab nurses and doctors and ask them questions like, "Do you believe in God?" She would immediately begin journaling her experiences and all that she saw in a book. When she got discharged, she was allowed to go home, and she would try talking to her mother and grandmother about these experiences, and seeing her mother's disbelief in her, she would understand that letting people know about these experiences and loving them unconditionally was going to be more difficult than she imagined. She would heed the calling she had been given, complete her education, and get a certification in teaching. When she got hired as a teacher and stood before her first class, she was taken aback as to what to say to this group of young people. She would then say that she did not plan on being here, and neither did they, but the calling she had gotten was higher than both of them, and once she had shared her story, her students looked dumbfounded and started asking her a flood of questions. This is when Tricia realized that the calling she had gotten was one that was meant for her, because this was how she was going to fill that void in her life by spreading the love that she had felt the day she died. Tricia now lives in Texas and tells her story to anyone willing to listen, and her books that talk about her experiences like Be the Light of Your Own Healing are bestsellers now. If you made it all the way to this part of the video, you may qualify for our membership, so you might want to listen closely. It's an exclusive area where we release videos